Again, showing houses is a very daunting and difficult job, riding around, making appointments. Listings is a little bit different. You kind of work on your phone and by your computer, and instead of making multiple trips to multiple houses, you're really just managing the process by which you get listings and then get things to the right price, and then get things sold, get under contract, and then manage the contract itself and manage the process to get to closing, to get your commission. So again, the listings is really the name of the game. Not as much fun as working with buyers because there's no excitement. There's no adrenaline pumping when you find the perfect house. Listings are typically grouchy because they want their house sold. And even today, when things sell immediately for over full price, listings, via sellers are never happy. If they get more than full price on the first day, sometimes they think you did something wrong by pricing the house wrong. And if they overprice it and it never sells, they think you did something wrong by overpricing it. So again, listings are very important in order to have a long career and make money. One of the important things we have to pay attention to when we talk about listings is the chapter on appraisals, so that we can correctly price someone's house so that we get the largest number of people considering it and end up with the largest possible offer that we can get. So again, the chapter on appraisals goes along well with listings. And so does the chapter on agency, which is one of the chapters that we did last week. The chapter on agency goes with listing. You'll see some similarities and some relevance when we go through the chapter to the chapter on agency. Remember, one of the ways that a seller appoints a real estate agent is by signing a listing agreement. A listing agreement is a bilateral express contract that's contingent. So there is some information from the chapter on contracts that we have to kind of be ready for. And again, I've all through my career, when I was first started, I was complaining to my broker, this is back in the early 1990s, that I was having a hard time getting my offers accepted by certain agents who I thought were not giving me a fair shake because I was newer, didn't know what I was doing. And my broker said to me back then, stop worrying about buyers and just get listings. Then you can be in charge. You can be the one who makes the decisions or who guides the sellers. So I took that information to heart, and I worked my entire career at trying to get more listings rather than trying to get more buyers. So you guys can do the same thing, and it's 8 o'clock. So since it's 8 o'clock and this is a special class, we are going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start on chapter 11. Chapter 11 is the chapter about listings, and I like to say that listings is where the money is. Listings is where the money is. So a listing contract is where a seller appoints a broker as their agent. Remember, it's the broker that's the agent, and salespeople are sub-agents of the broker. So a listing contract appoints the agent, which is the broker, appoints the agent as the seller's agent, and it is an express contract. A listing contract has everything both parties are expected to do spelled out on the listing agreement. A listing contract is a bilateral contract. Both parties have obligations and responsibilities. And a listing contract is a contingent contract. Contingent contract means we don't get paid unless the house closes. So again, on a listing, you're not going to make any money if you get a lot of listings unless you make sure you do the right thing and get those listings sold. In today's market, that's really easy because we have a shortage of listings and we have a very low interest rate, which is making a very high demand among buyers. So listings are just jumping off the shelf. And in a listing contract, the seller is appointing the broker as their agent, and the broker will then be a listing agent, but possibly could be a listing agent, and a buyer's agent if they have informed consent to dual agency. So they could be a listing agent with informed consent to dual agency that would allow them to represent both the seller and the buyer as an agent. if they have that informed consent to dual agency signed. That brings us back to the chapter on agency that we did the other night. Now, there's only a couple of types of listings. There's an exclusive right to sell listing, and that is by far my favorite kind of listing. An exclusive right to sell listing means that when the seller puts the house on the market with a real estate agent, no matter who procures the buyer, no matter who finds the buyer that ends up buying that house, the broker is going to get paid. About 95% of the listings in the MLS are exclusive right to sell. And it's really not fair, but in these exclusive right to sell listing agreements that we have, we don't even really mention that there's other options available, because most brokers don't want the sellers to know that there are other options available. So what's the next option? The next option is an exclusive agency listing. And in an exclusive agency listing, the owner reserves the right to sell the house themselves and not pay a commission. Now, that's dangerous to the real estate broker, because if the real estate broker has an exclusive agency listing and spends a lot of money marketing the property, and the buyer just finds somebody walking down the street to buy their house, there's no commission. So in an exclusive agency listing, the buyer reserves the right to sell it themselves and to not pay a commission. The next kind of a listing is an open listing. An open listing is the kind of listing that's given to many brokers at once. The same home is given to many brokers at once. And whoever finds the buyer, whoever is the procuring cause of the transaction, gets all the commission. An open listing is usually used for transactions like the VA or for HUD, where they have a lot of properties that are listed with a lot of brokers. Now, in the MLS, we only see exclusive right to sell listings 95% of the time, and exclusive agency listings 5% of the time. We don't see open listings in the MLS because open listings are given to many brokers or to all brokers. So if open listings were allowed in the MLS, the same property would show up in the MLS 100 times. Okay, so what we have is exclusive right to sell. That's the broker's favorite. No matter who finds the buyer, the broker gets commission. Exclusive agency, the owner reserves the right to sell it themselves and not pay a commission. In an exclusive agency, if a real estate agent is used, then the seller must pay a commission. An open listing is one where the seller announces that he's got the property for sale and gives the ability to market it to many brokers, and whoever finds the buyer gets all the commission. And then the last one is an oral listing. A recent change to the statute of frauds now allows oral listings in New Jersey. And typically in New Jersey, the statute of frauds said the broker needs written authority in order to collect a commission and to list the property for sale. Normally they need written authority. Okay, so I'm going to stop for just a second. Excuse me for just a second. Hello? I'm so sorry, somebody was at the door. So an oral listing, again, now is allowed by the statute of frauds if there's enough evidence to the nature and the existence of the agreement. Again, the one I like the best is an exclusive right to sell listing. 95% of the listings in the MLS are that type. An exclusive agency listing is where the owner reserves the right to sell it himself and pay no commission. An open listing is given to many brokers, and whoever sells it gets all the commission. And an oral listing is where you don't have a written listing agreement, But if you have enough evidence as to the nature and the extent of the listing, then the real estate broker can be able to collect his commission. And if the seller doesn't pay them, then the broker can, under that circumstance, sue for his commission. Now, the Real Estate Commission in Chapter 3 orders real estate agents to share commission. And they also order broker cooperation. So what broker cooperation means is share information. So the Real Estate Commission orders all real estate brokers to share information when they list a property for sale. If a seller decides they don't want that information shared, so they list their property with a specific broker and they don't want that broker to put it on the MLS, and they don't want that broker to allow it to be on Zillow or Realtor.com, then the buyer can sign a waiver of broker cooperation. And in a waiver of broker cooperation, the seller is essentially saying, I am instructing you not to cooperate. I am instructing you not to cooperate. I understand that I'm crazy and I wish to limit the people who know about my home, but I insist you do not cooperate. What the form really says is that I understand that by not cooperating, it may take longer to sell my house, it may result in a lower price, and it may not have as many people looking at it. But what it really means is that it's going to take longer to sell and you might not get as much money. So when you cooperate, it goes into MLS, it goes into Zillow, it goes into Realtor.com. If you sign one of these waiver of broker cooperations, only that one real estate office will know the property is for sale, and it won't go into MLS, it won't go into Zillow, and it won't go into Realtor.com. Now, why?
Hey, Bruce.
Yes.
Is that the same with a private sale?
No. No. Private sale is just when one person sells to another. This is really used for, let's say you have a Alpine, New Jersey, is the most expensive town in New Jersey, and you want to list your house for sale in Alpine. You may not want everybody to be able to see that your house is for sale, and so you don't want it on the MLS. You just want the broker in your town, in Alpine, to know that it's for sale because they have buyers in Alpine. So typically that's what it's used for. You get a lot of these waiver of broker cooperation listings in really expensive towns where they don't want regular people knowing about their house being for sale. That's the best example I can give you of that. Okay. Now, the multiple listing service, and I belong to several of them. I belong to Central Jersey MLS, I belong to Garden State MLS, I belong to New Jersey MLS, I belong to Bright MLS. All these MLSs are just bulletin boards. They're just places where sellers place inducements of offers to purchase. The MLS is not a type of a listing. Again, the MLS is not a type of a listing. It is merely a platform that we use to share information or to cooperate. And again, the Real Estate Commission says we have to cooperate. So if we have to cooperate, how do we cooperate? We put it on the multiple listing service. And it could be Central Jersey MLS, it could be Garden State MLS, it could be Bright MLS. But we're going to put it on one of those platforms in order to cooperate and to share the information. So we create a listing agreement. The best way to create it is through a written authorization, a listing agreement. And that listing agreement has some essential elements. It has to have the description of the property, the address. It has to have the name of the sellers and the name of the brokerage that's selling it. It has to have the price that the sellers are listing it for. It has to have the commission that they're offering to pay and how that commission is broken down. And it has to have an expiration date. All listings have to have an expiration date. So now when we talk about expiration of listing contracts, how do listing contracts expire? The first way is by expiration. If I have a listing that the expiration date is today, I'm hoping that the seller will give me an extension. If they don't, then my listing is over because it expired today. So at midnight, it will be over. Another way we terminate listing contracts is by death, insanity, or bankruptcy of either the seller or the broker. So if I was to die tomorrow, all the listings in my office would be terminated because I'm the broker. If one of my agents dies, we don't care, nothing happens. Another way to terminate a listing contract is by mutual agreement. That's where both the buyer and the seller say, listen, I don't really feel like selling my house now. It's too hot out. Let's just end this. So by mutual agreement, that terminates the listing agreement. By regulation or act of law, if your house is seized through condemnation by the right of eminent domain, if your house is seized by condemnation through the right of eminent domain, then that listing is terminated. Destruction of the premises. If you have your house listed for sale and it burns down, the listing is terminated. Revocation or renunciation. Revocation is when the seller says, listen, I want to terminate the listing agreement. I revoke my authority. So if you have a revocation and the seller says, I want to fire the agent may still be able to collect commission if the house sells within the listing period. So if you gave somebody a listing until the end of August and you fired them tomorrow on July 21st, and you said to the agent, I'm revoking my agency authority to you, you fired them. If you went ahead and sold the house sometime between now and the end of August, you would still owe the broker a commission. Renunciation is where the broker fires the seller. Maybe the seller is making illegal requirements. I have a house for sale in Edison now, and the neighbors came up to me, and the neighbors said, please don't sell this house to anybody but Jewish people. And I told them, that's illegal. They shouldn't be saying that. And then they went to the seller and they asked the seller the same thing. Please don't sell this house to anybody but Jewish people. And the seller, told me about it. And I said, listen, if you're going to say that, then I have to end the listing because that's an illegal request. And the seller said, no, I would never do that. I just wanted to let you know it was happening. So again, that's renunciation. That's when the seller is asking you to do something that's illegal or something that you don't find correct. And you can then, through renunciation, you can renounce your agency relation to them. And the best way to end a listing or to terminate a listing is accomplishment of the objective. When the house is closed, your listing contract is terminated. So accomplishment of the objective is the best way to terminate. So expiration, death, mutual agreement, regulation, destruction, revocation or renunciation, and accomplishment of the objective. That's how we terminate listing contracts. Excuse me. When you get your license, at first, you're going to be chasing expired listings. You're going to be chasing things that expired. So tomorrow, some listings will expire, hopefully not mine, but tomorrow some listings will expire. And when they expire, all the other real estate agents who work expireds will call up the seller and they'll tell them, I see your listing has just expired. Would you please give me a try? I'll do a better job than your last agent. So expiration terminates a listing agreement. And again, when you first get your license, you'll be chasing expireds. You'll be calling up all the things that expired tomorrow morning, to see if they'll now go do business with you. This is an expired listing. It's got information about it. It tells you when it expired. And when you're chasing after expired listings, you have to make sure that even though this is expired, you have to make sure that it isn't relisted again with someone else. So here's the X for the expiration date. If you're chasing expireds and you're looking at this property, you want to also look to make sure that 122 LaRue Lane hasn't been relisted again with someone else. Because if it has, then you don't have the ability to chase that listing. If it hasn't, if it isn't listed with someone else and it's tomorrow morning, then you have the ability to contact the seller and say, please list with me. All right, so what type of listing does the broker like best? And I like exclusive right to sell, because no matter who finds the buyer, I get paid my commission. What type of listings can the seller sell with no commission? Well, they can have both an exclusive agency listing, and that way if the seller finds their own buyer, there's no commission, or an open listing. So either one of these can be a listing that the seller does not have to pay a commission for. an open listing, or an exclusive agency listing. And there's a warning on exclusive agency listings. Many builders use exclusive agency listings. And when a builder uses an exclusive agency listing, he will have his employee in a trailer, in the sales trailer outside of the units. So he'll have his employee inside the sales trailer, and his employee will be being paid usually an hourly rate. And if a buyer comes directly into the sales trailer, there's no commission. So if you want to show a listing that's an exclusive agency listing, you want to show that builder's house, and it's an exclusive agency listing, you have to make sure you register your buyer. You have to make sure you register your buyer. Because if you don't, there's a giant motivation for the buyer to go behind your back and go to the seller and say, listen, just sell me for the property less the commission. So again, you want to make sure you register your buyer. So a question that came in is, how do we know the seller info when Expire MLS does not have the info or not? So I'm going to answer that to the best of my ability. What you're going to do is you're going to look at the expireds the next morning on the list. You're going to look at all the expireds on the list, and then you're going to make sure that those expireds haven't been relisted by another broker, because if they have, you can't call them, or haven't been relisted by the same broker, because if they have, you can't call them. But how do you get the information? All sorts of sources. You can Google for information. You can buy sources such as Cole, C-O-L-E, RedX. There is a number of vendors that will sell you information about the phone number or the email of those sellers. And as a last resort, or first resort, if you're very, very aggressive, first thing tomorrow morning, when things show as expired, if they're not relisted, go knock on the door. This is a great time for knocking on doors because everybody's supposed to be home. So you'll find people at home. Put your mask on and go knock on somebody's door and say, listen, I see you expired last night. I'm the right person for your job now. Why don't you hire me to be your agent? I hope that explained it. All right, so a couple of questions. Number one, I'll let you guys go through these because otherwise I'm going to go too fast. I'm going to let you guys go through these because otherwise I'll just give you the answers. So let me give you a couple minutes to work on these.
Hey, Bruce,
Yes.
can I answer all the questions?
Sure.
Okay. Number one, I would say A.
After showing the property to a prospective broker with an exclusive agency listing, what they should do is they should, remember this, you have to register them with the seller because you
Correct.
prove to the seller that you are the procuring cause. Okay.
Okay, that's B.
Now, so let me tell you how this really works. If you're showing a builder's listing and you bring your buyer to the builder and you bring him, you have to sign, there's a form you have to sign the buyer in on. And that form then proves that you were the procuring cause. And builders are very mean about this stuff. They won't let you just send your buyer down to them. They make you bring the buyer down in person and hand over the form. Okay, how about number two?
Number two is B, as a boy.
So we said that oral listings, because of a change in the statute of frauds, are enforceable with sufficient evidence as to the nature and the extent of the agreement. And that was a change that happened in 1996. So in 1996, they changed the statute of frauds and they made an oral agreement legal. Now that's important because when you're working with the seller and the seller says, if a buyer comes to the house, should I stay in the house or should I talk to them? My advice is if you're a seller and buyers are coming into the house, go stand outside. You don't want to talk to them because if you say something to them, for instance, they say to you, how is the pump in the pool? Is it working good? And you say, oh yeah, that pump in the pool works great. That's sort of an oral agreement that you're going to promise the pump in the pool is working great. So again, you want to be careful about having comments because they could be construed as an oral listing. And oral listings are enforceable if there's a preponderance of evidence. All right, how about number three?
B.
All right, that's right. We don't care if salespeople die. We only care if I die, if the broker dies. So the answer is B. Let's go to number four. Type of listing agreement that provides for the payment of a commission to the broker, even if the owner sells it without the broker's help, is what kind of listing?
C.
Well, that's a tricky one. So I get paid no matter what on an exclusive right to sell listing. Remember, on an exclusive agency listing, the seller reserves the right to sell it and not pay a commission. So the type of listing agreement that provides for the payment of a commission to the broker, even if the owner makes the sale, the only one that does that is exclusive right to sell. In C, if the seller sells it himself without the broker's help, he doesn't have to pay a commission.
That's correct.
All right, number five. This is a very tricky one because we already know from four that one of the answers is exclusive agency listing. But what other way could the seller sell it himself and not pay a commission?
That's B.
So we know that exclusive agency is one of the ways, but the reason it's a tricky question is also on an open listing, whoever sells it gets all the commission. So if the seller sells it themselves, he gets all the commission, which is the same as there being no commission. So,
yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So this is a short chapter, but there's some tough ones. Let's go to, I have five more. Let's see how we do on the next five. So a question is, how do we know the seller info when it expires? MLS does not have the information sometimes. You look up the tax records, and the tax records will show you who is the seller. Every MLS has some system of looking up tax records, and there's lots of free public sites that you can look up tax records, and then you can see who is the seller. Some listing agreements, some MLS printouts do show the seller, but most of the time people put owner of record or some other thing on there to disguise who the seller is. But all you need to do is pull the tax records, or you can even just go on a lot of public websites, and there's a way to see who the seller is. All right. Number 6, a listing contract in which the broker's commission is contingent on the broker being able to produce a buyer before the property is sold by the owner or another broker is an open listing, right? Because on an open listing, whoever sells it gets all the commission. So the listing broker only gets his commission if he sells it. So the answer to 6 is an open listing. Number 7, a listing may be terminated by all of the following except, and again, how do we terminate listing agreements? Well, by mutual agreement, by operation of law, because the property burns down, that's impossibility of performance. So the answer is because the seller can't find another house to buy. Number 8, the broker enters into a listing agreement with the seller in which the seller will receive $12,000 from the sale of the lot, and the broker will receive any sale proceeds over this amount. That is a net listing, and it's illegal in New Jersey. If you say, you sell my house, and anything you get above $12,000, you get to keep for the commission, that's a net listing, and it's illegal in New Jersey. Number 9, a property owner signed a 90-day listing agreement with a broker. The owner was killed in an accident before the listing expired. Now the listing is, and it's terminated upon the death of the principal. Now let's think about this for a second. You get a listing agreement, sign it with the seller, and the seller dies, your listing agreement is terminated. I've had that happen before. I've had sellers die. The listing is terminated. But let's look at it a little bit differently. You have a listing agreement, and you have a house for sale, and a buyer makes an offer, and the seller accepts the offer. And now you have a contract, and then the seller dies. The contract survives the death. The contract for purchase survives the death. The listing contract, if there's no offer accepted, the listing contract is terminated upon the death of the principal. Okay? So I've had sellers die before the house was sold, before the house was under contract, and my listing was terminated. And I've had sellers die after a contract was signed, and then I still got my commission, and we still were able to consummate the transaction, because a death does not cancel a contract. A death does cancel a listing agreement if there's no contract yet, but it does not cancel a contract. Number 10, an owner lists a property for sale with a broker. Another broker finds a buyer for the house. The listing broker did not receive a commission for the sale. It had to be an open listing. Because if it was an exclusive right to sell listing, the broker gets paid no matter what. If it was an exclusive agency listing, only if the seller sells it themselves is there no commission. And in this case, another broker found the buyer. Therefore, the listing broker still gets paid. So the answer is an open listing. And then remember, a multiple listing is not even a type of listing. A multiple listing is merely a bulletin board where we post listings that are available. Okay, all of these questions are really representative of what might be shown on the test. So you want to kind of keep your eyes and ears open, and these are very typical questions for the test. Now, we're going to go over this chapter again tomorrow at the start of our class. We've got a couple of chapters we're doing tomorrow. Let me see if I can see which ones are on here, because I texted somebody earlier. So tomorrow we're going to do chapter listings, and then we're going to do, which is chapter 11. Then we're going to do chapter 12 and 13. And then we're probably going to do more questions than normal tomorrow night, because this chapter, which we did tonight, chapter 12 and chapter 13 are relatively quick chapters. So we'll work on some more questions tomorrow night to get us a little bit more in the spirit of taking tests. And the bad news is we haven't had math questions in a long time. So we will have a couple of math questions tomorrow night. And then on Wednesday night, we're going to take on the hardest chapter in the book. On Wednesday night, we're going to do mortgages and financing. So tomorrow night, again, is going to be listings again, chapter 11, then chapter 12, then chapter 13, then a couple of test questions, and then a couple of math questions. That's tomorrow night. And Wednesday night is going to be the chapter on mortgages. A couple of people have asked me if I give them a little bit more heads up so they can read the chapters in advance. Okay. That's it for tonight. It was just a quickie class to kind of go over this again before we did it tomorrow. So I'll see all you guys tomorrow night, and thank you for stopping in.
Thank you, Bruce.
All right. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.